All right, let's talk about a name that's basically become a synonym for scheming, backstabbing, and ruthless ambition, Niccolo Machiavelli. For 500 years, this guy's name has been treated like a four-letter word.
I mean, even William Shakespeare got in on the action, calling him the murderous Machiavel. His reputation got so dark that people actually suggested the devil himself took the nickname Old Nick as a little nod to Niccolo. Seriously.
But here's a thought. What if we've had him wrong this whole time? What if his book, The Prince, isn't really a guide for evil tyrants, but is actually the most brutally honest playbook for anyone trying to navigate the modern business world?
To really get what he was saying, we first have to slash through this huge myth that's been built up around him.
I mean, look at this list of fans and enemies. It's wild. You've got Napoleon Bonaparte, the fascist dictator Mussolini, even Joseph Stalin, who supposedly kept a marked-up copy of The Prince right by his bed. At the same time, the church was calling him an antichrist and banning his work. For half a millennium, he's been the poster boy for doing whatever it takes to grab power.
Okay, but here's the big twist. This whole reputation kind of misses the entire point of his work. See, Machiavelli wasn't trying to be a bad guy. He was a pragmatist. He was just obsessed with one thing, what actually works.
And that's the absolute key to understanding him. He wasn't interested in the debate between right and wrong. He was interested in what was effective. How do you get power? How do you use power? And how do you keep it? His analysis was just a cold, hard look at reality, with all the moral stuff stripped away.
You can boil down his entire philosophy to this right here. Most thinkers at the time were writing about how we ought to live, in some ideal world. Machiavelli was the one guy focused on how we actually live, in all its messy, selfish reality. He basically said that if you try to be a perfectly good person in a world that isn't, you're just going to get crushed.
Think of him less like a priest and more like a political scientist. He studied power the same way a biologist studies a shark, not judging it, just observing how it behaves in the real world. And that's exactly why his ideas feel so timeless and, frankly, so shockingly relevant to business today.
So how does this cold-blooded way of thinking apply to the office? Well, let's start with the tricky business of managing people. Ouch, that sounds pretty cynical, right? But look at it from a management perspective. It's basically a risk assessment. Machiavelli is saying you can't build your strategy hoping people will be loyal and kind out of the goodness of their hearts. You have to build it on the reality that most people are driven by self-interest, fear, and, well, the desire for a bigger paycheck.
And here it is, probably his most infamous piece of advice. He argues that love is flimsy. People will break that bond the second it's inconvenient for them. But fear? Fear of consequences? That makes people think twice. So how on earth does that apply to a modern workplace without getting you sued?
Okay, the word fear is pretty harsh, but let's just swap it out for a modern business word, respect. Now the lesson becomes incredibly useful. A leader who is only liked eventually gets taken advantage of. But a leader who is respected for their skills, for their fairness, for their willingness to make the hard calls, that's a leader who will be effective. Whoa, okay. This one is pure, cold-blooded strategy. What he's saying here is that half measures are the worst of all worlds. They create enemies who are still just strong enough to come back and get revenge. When you're dealing with a competitor or a problem, you either win them over completely or you act so decisively that they are no longer a threat. It's the indecision in the middle that gets you into trouble.
All right, so let's zoom out from managing your team to managing your image. This is where Machiavelli's ideas on strategy, branding, and negotiations start to feel scarily modern.
Get this. 500 years before the first marketing department was ever created, Machiavelli absolutely nailed the power of branding. He knew that what your company seems to be is often way more important than what it actually is. Why? Because everyone sees the surface, but very few people ever bother to dig any deeper. A powerful, confident image can be your single greatest weapon.
To thrive, Machiavelli said, a leader has to be two animals in one. You need to be the lion, representing pure strength and power, to scare off your rivals. But the lion isn't very smart. He can walk right into a trap. That's why you also have to be the fox. The fox is clever, cunning, and can spot danger a mile away. You need both brute force and strategic smarts to win.
So you know that whole let's find a win-win idea in negotiations? Yeah, forget it. For Machiavelli, a negotiation is basically a war fought with words. He pointed out that while lying is terrible in most parts of life, in war,
And by extension, in high-stakes deal-making, it's actually praiseworthy and glorious. The goal isn't to be friends, the goal is to win. Period.
Okay, so what about the disruptors, the innovators, the startup founders trying to change the world? Well, Machiavelli had some pretty serious warnings for them too. Anyone who has ever tried to launch a new product or change a company's culture or start a movement knows this feeling deep in their bones. Machiavelli saw that being an innovator is one of the most dangerous jobs you can have, and he knew exactly why.
This is just brilliant. He breaks it down into 3 challenges. First, you will get attacked ferociously by everyone who likes things the way they are. Second, the people who might actually benefit from your new idea, they're only going to give you lukewarm support because they're scared and skeptical. And third, you have to fight against plain old human nature. Most people just don't trust new things. You're fighting a war on 3 fronts at once.
So this all brings us to the ultimate Machiavellian idea, the one phrase that has defined his legacy and, let's be honest, has been used to justify some pretty terrible things over the years.
There it is, the phrase everyone knows, the idea that you can do anything you want, no matter how cruel or shady, as long as you get the result you're looking for. But what if that's not really what he meant?
Here is the crucial, missing piece of the puzzle. The original Latin phrase, exitus acta probat, means something more like, the outcome validates the deeds. It implies that your goal has to be so important, so noble, that it justifies the difficult, messy actions you took to achieve it. And get this, whose family motto was it? George Washington's. This wasn't meant as an excuse for being a villain. It was an ethical test for great leaders facing impossible choices.
And so that leaves us with this. Machiavelli's world was not a nice, friendly place. And let's be real, neither is the modern marketplace. He doesn't give us a moral compass. What he gives us is a map of reality. And he forces us to ask ourselves, in a world this competitive, can you really afford to play by the ideal rules, or do you have to understand the real ones to survive and even to win? Maybe the answer is somewhere in between the lion and the fox.